Hello and welcome to Instructional Design from the Ground Up. This is your home for all things ISD, SME, teaching, training, all that fun stuff. So whether you're new or experienced or whatever your point in this whole spectrum of stuff that we do is, please join us as we do live sessions on Tuesday night and almost 100 other videos that you can find here on YouTube. And tonight I have the personal pleasure of having my friend and colleague Julie here, and we're going to talk about subject matter experts. And I got to tell you, before we get into the introductions, in my book on SMEs, does that look familiar, Julie?
Oh my!
Now, who is that? Huh? So if anybody's got SMEs from the ground up, you can go in there and see Julie's picture. Her and I have been doing this for it seems like 300 decades, but transportation learning and everywhere that we've been, and how many cities across the country and projects have we worked together. And what I've found being with you, not only is I incredibly fond of you as a person, but you have mastered this art of making SMEs part of the community in instructional design and making them feel welcome and respected and all the fun stuff that we all hope that happens, but really in reality seldom does. So I'm going to let Denise do the formal introduction, and then we're going to have some really good conversation with you. And thank you so much for being with us, Julie.
Thanks, Jack.
It is really, really great to have you here with us, Julie. I don't want to butcher your last name, but I'm going to anyway, probably because I just have this weird accent and I'm going to do it anyway. So welcome, everybody. We're going to welcome Julie Deibel-Pundt. Did I say that right?
I mean, if you want to do it very German, we go Deibel-Pundt.
Please correct me. Let the listeners know how to really pronounce your name.
It would be Deibel-Pundt.
I was close. Anyway, Julie has over a decade experience in instructional systems design, in which she holds a master's level certificate. She also has a master's in urban planning and a bachelor's degree in human geography. She's been employed at nonprofits for all of her professional career and was driven to join the International Transportation Learning Center, where she is the program director of instructional design in 2008 because of her passion around equity and the role mobility plays. Julie, it's really so fantastic to have you here with us today. Really happy to be here. Welcome.
Great.
We're going to talk about SMEs, aren't we?
We are my favorite. It's true. I'll tell you more.
All right. Well, Julie has this presentation that she's going to share with us. It's a micro learning lesson in helping to work through the communication and the relationships that we have with subject matter experts. So I'm going to let you take it away, Julie. We're going to start off here. We're going to change scenes here, and it's all yours.
Sure. Thank you, guys. And I'm going to try and live up to Chuck's great introduction there. And, I've learned a lot over the years, a lot of it from Chuck directly. Like you said, I think it's been not 300,000 years or whatever you said, but at least a solid decade.
Oh, it's over a decade. Yeah.
Chuck was actually the one that realized that I am an instructional designer, or I was doing instructional design work, and I didn't know it was even a term till then. So thank you guys for having me here. Sure, if you could go ahead, Denise. So I wanted to start off giving a shout out to all the great SMEs, and this is just a snapshot. There's been hundreds that I've worked with over the decade, maybe closer to 2, something like that. And all the lessons that they've taught me, and been really blessed to work with them. So I just wanted to start off up front with that. And it takes 2 or more people to make this work. So thank you guys for that. And about me, Denise mentioned that I do have a bachelor's in human geography, also studied American studies, cultural anthropology, that sort of thing. So I'm really aware of kind of what people bring to the table as far as their lens, demographically, their experiences, things like that. So I thought it was good to bring that to you guys before I start getting into what I know about subject matter experts and what's worked for me. I think it's also important to mention that I am currently program director of instructional design, which means I am doing things like writing proposals, managing projects, leading the team, but I really make it a priority to stay grounded in the real work of doing the design and working with subject matter experts, because it's important, and also it really is my favorite part of that. And just some kind of more background here on why I felt like being from a working class family was important for my lens is my father actually worked for Bethlehem Steel, pipe fitter, union guy. And I remember being like 5 or 6 years old and him coming home from work and saying, they gave me a blueprint again, these engineers, and they just want me to do it. But, it won't work because of this angle of that pipe or this or the pressure, things that I didn't understand, but he did. And he said, I'm really tired of just telling them and them ignoring me. And I guess I'll build it and it won't work. And then I'll do it again. And, and in his mind, it's because I don't have that piece of paper backing up my knowledge. I don't have that college degree. And so in my work, I've worked with trainers, supervisors, but really, I think frontline workers, listening to their experience and their knowledge, I see how important that is for having good training and having a good workplace, but also to have people engaged in the workplace. Nobody likes to be ignored. So that's kind of my lens in a nutshell. If you could go forward, Denise. And I spent some time thinking about all the things that have worked for me in my line of work with the people I've worked with, and fit them into 4 categories. And I really tried for an E here on the last item to make it nice and care. And, I'm a little kind of frou-frou hippie, so care would be perfect. But instead, if you could go forward, Denise, found the last thing is really processed. So it's a fish. I'm vegetarian, but it's a fish. So anyway, if you could go forward, Denise. Thank you. So connection, and they are ordered, I think, in priority. Especially, Chuck, you can recall, it took me a little while to get this. I think that I have a tendency to connect with people pretty easily anyway, but I really was taskmaster, deliverables, we got to get through, let's all focus on the timelines. And really, as I loosened up a little bit more, and I really occurred to me, some of the things people have been saying, that personal connection is so important, for so many reasons. And I'd say that sort of thing organically comes out over time. In working with subject matter experts, I've been lucky to have like multiple year long relationships, working relationships with folks, but not everybody has that, and a couple ways that I found that work really well to kind of get that quicker. And it seemed a little cliche, and I read it a couple times in different articles, but at our last meeting, when we did introductions, I said, if you could include, along with your title and your organization, all that sort of stuff, one boring fact about yourself. It took the pressure off. People didn't feel like they had to be some Olympic swimmer level person or something to share that. And just the next coffee break, people were swapping pictures of their family dog, looking at those and be like, oh, I love my dog too. Or what about this new 21 Pilots album, and it really, you got there quick. Another thing is shared experiences. If you're not having necessarily interests that overlap, but sharing something memorable really connects you quickly. We do like city tours. This last meeting we had, we went to Niagara Falls, and I'm a big nature person, but I think that sort of huge, beautiful thing, sharing that with someone, you feel connected. And that connection's important because first of all, you're more comfortable sharing. Not everyone's outspoken. Some SMEs might need to be drawn out a little bit more. But when you're connected to people, you feel like you have to show up for them more. You have to show up, you have to contribute. When you say you're going to do something, you do it, or you have enough of a rapport that, the guys are going to rib on you and give you a hard time about it. Like there's and it makes it more fun, but it really does make it more efficient. If you could go forward, Denise. And so authenticity is probably my favorite thing in the world. But
No, you're kidding.
but really, we all know, like Adult Learning 101, when someone shows up into a classroom and they're not just being themselves a teacher, they don't really know the subject matter inside and out, and they're not being real with the students or learners, participants, whatever term you want to use, the learner smells that right away and disengages, and it's not just a learner thing, it's a human thing. So, I think it's really important to connect in that way. And for me, that means being kind of informal and playful and cursing sometimes, but that works in the environment I deal with. Not too much filter, but along with authenticity, it's true, Chuck.
Yes, I know.
And I think people can appreciate that, being able to loosen up a little bit and not feel like they just have to be straight and proper and watch what they're saying. You get more out of the conversation when people can be themselves. And along with that is being vulnerable. And that's admitting that you don't really understand something from a design perspective. That's so important, because if you don't understand it at least long enough to make it into a learning activity, and then forget it, which we know we do. But if you don't really understand it, you're going to convey wrong information. And depending on the field you're in, that could be life or death, So being vulnerable also and authentic also opens the doors to everyone else being the same, feeling that freedom and feeling more comfortable to speak up when the timeline of development or the way that if you need SMEs to get information to you, if that doesn't work for them, having that open communication and they're being able to say, Julie, I don't understand what you're really looking for here, and not worrying about seeming like they're not intelligent, but that's just part of how we function as a group. So I think that's what I've got there. Denise, if you could go forward, along with the playfulness, some respect. And in my role, I've also interviewed way too many people looking for instructional designer jobs, and when I asked them about how they work with subject matter experts, and I think we all are pretty good at respecting them in a way. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But for me, that means being prepared, doing at least a Wikipedia level look at a topic before I walk into a room with folks, so I can have some kind of working knowledge. I refer to the time with subject matter experts as kind of the golden hour, that you want to have all your things lined up, have concise, pointed questions, and that shows that you respect them. And of course, gratitude, acknowledging what they bring to the table and this, that, the other. And that really the process wouldn't be possible without their involvement. And I felt like I wanted to share something I experienced recently with one of the people I interviewed for a job, and asked them about how they work with subject matter experts. And the way she phrased it back to me is like, well, you really got to stroke their ego, and you got to do this and you got to do that. I was like, I see that you don't actually respect them, and they're going to see that too. And I'm not going to talk to you probably ever again. It's got to be authentic. If you could go forward, Denise. Thank you. And I think that I'm not sure about this because I've never been a male instructional designer in my early 20s, but I know that looking back, more than once have I either directly or indirectly been called a secretary. And that's something that, in my mid 20s, I did kind of take that and maybe even internalize it. But we all know instructional design is a science, and that it's important that you do position yourself and speak like you know what you're doing and show that there is theory and there is framework, et cetera, behind the work that we do, for a whole lot of reasons. And I'll get into that. But one thing that I've seen that's really been successful is having these mini ISD lessons, we call them, with subject matter experts. And it may be 30, 40 minutes. We've actually used one of your books for them, Chuck, the original ISD from the ground up there. And they come away with it understanding that it is the science, first of all, and understanding more of the steps involved, and maybe why we're asking some of the questions we are, because sometimes it's like, why do you even care about that? But if we need to take these steps to systematically develop training that's going to be understood and retained, then that helps that. And I went back and forth on if I was going to share this story, but I'm going to. And you remember Tom, Chuck.
Oh,
yeah. Brilliant guy, subject matter
absolutely
expert.
brilliant. He lived not far from me here. Yeah.
And super outspoken, and was facilitating a session with him and I think 5 or 6 other SMEs, and had asked a question that was not like just a cut and dry yes or no answer, but it was more of an opinion. And I'd asked it once, and Tom was the first to respond, and I figured he would be. Asked it again. Again, Tom just responded, and he continued to do that. And so there was a moment when, and I guess it was interpreted completely different, still positively, but where I knew that Tom needed to understand it wasn't just the Tom show. I love him, uh, but there are other people with opinions here, and it was important for other SMEs to know that their opinions mattered too. And, I said, Tom, that's great. I got it on paper. Let's hear what other people think. And to me, see, you guys chuckle. To me, it's just like, that's, of course, the direct way to do it. But
Well, what you don't know is that I had a conversation with Tom, which makes it even funnier now, because he and I took a long walk. I think we were up in Philadelphia, right? And
that sounds about right, right?
yeah, so he and I went down Race Street together for a little while, just so you know.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Did things get better, Julie, as the days went on?
Well,
after this talk that Chuck had with Tom?
I didn't know this discussion happened, but I mean, I know from then on, we had a good relationship, Tom and
Oh, he
I.
was a
And there
great
was,
guy. And it had, I mean, as far as someone knowing their skill and their trade, there was none better. And he was just used to being the one that everybody looked to, and he was the informal leader in any work group he was in. And so he just needed, a context for what he was doing. Wasn't a negative thing at all. It certainly wasn't anything negative against you, because he respected the daylights out of you.
mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I was going with that, is that asserting yourself to a reasonable level helps to grow that respect,
Oh, heck.
and I wrote this down, so I want to make sure I get it right here, because I think it's really important, especially knowing the mission you guys have behind this podcast, or not podcast, but these YouTube presentations, is that it took me a while to really embody it, but especially for new instructional designers, I think it's important to know that gaining respect for yourself is not about your ego. It's about the process. It's about showing what you bring to the table. And again, I think it might be a female thing more than a male thing. I'm not sure. I've never been male, but like, I think as far as I remember, but it's about what you bring to the table, and it's about doing it well and understanding how SMEs and instructional designers complement each other. So
Yeah.
there's that. I do have one more item there, if you could, Denise, and I think the process part is related to that. And process, it was interesting to me that putting this together, this actually came last in my mind, because it's the systematic part we all think about, but really having all that foundational work there, the process isn't going to go nearly as well if you don't have that there. And I complimentary talking about the well-defined roles of the subject matter expert and the instructional designer. The ISD is having that knowledge on learning and development, and the SME having that knowledge of what needs to be done in that job and what content needs to be there. Having a clear process, again, the ISD lessons that we've done that outline what steps to take. I've had kind of that look from folks before of, oh, we got 6 months to do this course. Why are you rushing about it? Not realizing you got to get the objectives, the outcome, get a storyboard, like all the quality assurance stuff at the end. Breaking that out helps with this sense of urgency and therefore commitment. It's been my experience. And always flexibility. Whatever format you can get information in, take it. If it's scribbled down on a napkin and someone's texting a picture to you, take it. I've been at lunch with a SME and first time understanding what track circuits on railroads are, and forks and knives on the table, explaining it, take a picture, however they can come to you with that information, because it's not their full-time job. It's ours. They have a million other things they're doing. So that's what I've got there. I think the last slide is just a summary of those things. And, again,
where's your fish? You got to have your
fish is
fish.
gone. I don't know where he went.
Oh, yeah, he went for a swim.
Now you know what I'm getting you for Christmas, don't you?
The carp. I have a good joke about that one, but
yeah, we'll share that off camera. Well, see, Julie, what you have done now is you have done the perfect, how many minutes? You've done the perfect 20 minutes of how to be a professional instructional designer and to find the best relationship professionally and socially and every other way possible with the SMEs that you work with. And what the context of what Julie does is she's working in very technical fields. So transportation learning is about transportation. And it's with regional transit agencies, it's with lots of other people. So you're talking about huge organizations with hundreds of thousands of members working in these places across these consortiums. And they pull out the best and the brightest for the most part to work on these projects because they are so important. Some are federally mandated, some are mandated in other ways, but these are very important projects that have to get done. And the level that Julie's working at is so high that sometimes she's very casual in her reflection of it. But these are, how many times do we sit at dinner and, like you said, we're sitting there talking about elevator, escalator. We did bus maintenance. We did signals. I don't know what the other ones. I don't even know what you're working on now. But this whole notion of this is just really technical stuff that an instructional designer has to have at least a handle on to be able to put together this courseware. And some of these courses, you look at apprenticeships, those are 4 and 5 years sometimes. And this is a lot of work and a lot of stuff. And I remember specifically the first couple of times I worked with you was, I think we were down in Silver Spring, down the office, and you were still at Georgetown, right? You're still finishing up your master's there.
UMC, or College Park, but yeah.
College Park, yeah. So you're working on what you were doing, and it was nowhere within 300 majors of instructional design. And I'm thinking, Julie, please, please don't go. Please don't go. And I talked to Brian and I would talk to Jack and I'd say, you've got to do something. We can't let her go. And, obviously my gut instinct was correct once out of 300 times. But, I can't tell you how proud I am of you. I really am. You embody what I would like to see in every instructional designer that works within the environment that you work in. You're professional, you're very task oriented, but you also get that smile and you can take somebody's knees out and they still want to thank you for it because I mean these are rough crowds, right? I mean these are crowds of people that are really good at what they do, but the real world. And they're constantly in environments that their lives are in danger or they're doing things that are very important. And to develop the relationships you had. And you were talking about the socializing, and I remember in Philadelphia with Jerome. Remember he got us all on that tour bus in Philadelphia?
Right.
It was about 40 degrees out, but he insisted we sit on the top of this open bus. And we were all, I was going to start a bonfire because, of course, I'm the oldest and I was freezing to death. But I'll tell you, we never laughed so hard and never had a better time as a group, at least from my perspective, was that silly bus tour of Philadelphia, which was, I think, was about 2 hours. And Jerome was just so cute about putting that together and making sure everybody was happy. And it's those kind of things that you don't put in books and you don't learn in grad school. It's those kind of things that people like you take their experience in other ways, like with your father being a blue collar, very professional, very technical skills that he had. I know what he did. And,
Hmm.
to grow up in that environment and to see that life and have a different perspective of it, Julie, it's just tremendous.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wish he understood the impact that he has. He's
Yeah.
downplayed it probably because, others have downplayed it so many times. But, and as far as there was a connection between my urban planning and at least transportation training because both of them, I started at the center because I wanted to help people have reliable transportation so that they can somewhat level the playing field a little bit, for people that can't afford cars to get around everywhere. Um, and yeah, and it's interesting because quite a few planners have come through there, and
Mm.
I think it's because if done the right way, ISD can make impact pretty quickly,
Oh,
and you're not following a lot of bureaucratic red tape. I mean, sometimes, right? But like the impact can be instant.
Mhm.
So it's a
Well,
good feeling.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite slides you had up there was respect because I was singing I actually wanted to break out into song, RESPCT, but I didn't. Well, I just did. But anyway, I think that you had some really amazing points. One of them is to have fun with people, and that's what I like to do here. And, that's what Chuck and I try to do. We try to keep it light because it's really to get your lesson across or to get your point across or to be able to understand somebody else's point. It's important to have that connection, like you talked about, that authenticity. One thing that I can say that I struggle with, and I'm sure that many new designers probably struggle with, is that whole imposter syndrome of being that new person in the room with experts. These subject matter experts are experts in what they do, and it can be a little intimidating, I think,
Mhm.
for some of us. What would you say to somebody? What would your advice be to somebody who, walks into a room, maybe reads the Wikipedia before walking into that room? I liked that advice. I really did because I do think that it's important to set that grounding foundation within yourself before you walk into a room. But what would you say? What would your biggest piece of advice be to somebody who kind of suffers from a little imposter syndrome, being the instructional designer in the room, talking to these experts and wanting to get it right?
First, I would say that I don't know about everybody, but most people feel that way. All like at whenever you're leveling up, it's actually like the synchronicity is ridiculous to me for me because I'm reading this book and opened the chapter last night and I was kind of stressing out about today, and it was like self love and the imposter syndrome. Seriously, was the chapter last night,
Yeah.
and it's just well, how you deal with it is realizing that whenever you're leveling up and you're challenging yourself, you're not going to feel like you completely fit there,
Right.
and to welcome that. And also the vulnerability, openness part of it. I still like, we joke about it because I can talk about transformers and all kinds of stuff. I have no idea. I can draw one now just because it's like a long squiggly line, but like, I'm telling the guys, like the quote is, I can't tell you how many times in a week, if I have a week long meeting with folks, how many times I say, this is not my area of expertise. It's adult learning, and if you've gotten through a program, you know what you're doing. The ISD programs especially are so grounded in learning well, because that's, it's the nature of it. You can't go take a class in anything else after you learn this. But that you're going to have the application, and if you got through it, you know what you're doing, and when you don't, you should admit it.
I love that. And you know what else I love? I think you should write a book on SMEs and call it Leveling Up, working with SMEs. Because in my mind, when you used the phrase leveling up, I saw it visually on a book cover. Like, that would be perfect. So if you've ever thought about writing a book.
It's on my 20-year plan to write some sort of book. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, you should.
Absolutely.
One thing that I was tasked to do early on at TLC, when Brian was still there, was to migrate the organization from using consultings to building internal capacity in instructional design. And I think this is a constant tension in organizations, is whether they should have just consultants come in and do things, or whether they should take that leap and develop that internal capacity. And I think we were very successful at that, moving you from a very large consulting organization that was robbing you blind, which is where I got the nickname Three Fingers from Jack, if you remember that particular meeting with those consultants. And this whole notion of all you have to do is hire really bright instructional designers like you and others that are now and have in the past worked at transportation, and have a little faith and invest in a little bit of training if they needed. You went back and got your graduate certificate, and Jack did too. And this whole notion of organizations, you can do this. And but I can sit here and say it all day. What would you say to groups that are sitting in that position now, paying way too much money for nothing, and when they can really do this in-house if they want to?
It's a good question. And I first want to say that we're at a team of 6 instructional designers now, which isn't a lot.
You're up to 6? Really?
What's that?
You're up to 6. That's fantastic.
The organization is 15. That's huge.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, right. It's a huge percentage. And, a lot of the people that apply for jobs that's what they're drawn to, is having that environment. Because like you guys said, there's not really that platform out there to work with each other and bat ideas around. That's a good question, Chuck. I mean, I guess I would definitely recount what I've seen grow in the last 10 years. I mean,
the thing that struck me was
a little bit more.
What I saw organizationally was a lack of confidence, and not because of the people involved in it, because they're all tremendous people and very smart and very tasked, and it was not that, but just institutionally, with the lack of experience in instructional design, they were relying on things that they were being told by people they were paying a lot of money to, whose real role was to make more money, not to make the organization better. Their courseware was marginally awful, and there was no way that you couldn't do better, especially with the right people. So, I mean, there you were. And I think it took some convincing for you to want to be an instructional designer, because it was kind of like, what? What's that? And
I think that's the big question. I mean, once I got it, it's like creativity and systematic approach and psychology, of course. It's
combines the best of all things.
Right.
But I can remember that transition. I can remember the transition from the consultants to you running the programs, and how there was this deep sigh of relief among the subject matter experts. And I don't know if you were aware of that or not, but they felt,
but looking back, yeah, you're right.
They were so much more comfortable with you and with the others that were on those teams at that time. I don't know where I fit in there at that point. I was kind of the guy standing in the corner most of the time. But the subject matter experts really appreciated the fact that this was personal. It was not a consulting relationship, that you were fully engaged and fully involved and fully committed. The organization obviously was from the top on down. Everybody there was committed to what you were doing. And I think that is part of that SME relationship too. And you talk about authenticity. That's exactly what was happening. Was the level of authenticity was almost complete in the sense that there was nobody there for anything but the betterment of the organization, of the craftspeople in the field, and in making
Mhm.
people's lives successful and safe. And I could sense it in those rooms, Julie.
I wonder how that would have played out if I'm trying to think of a for-profit thing, because the nature of nonprofits is that you're attracting people that, were in it and we're devoted to it, and we're not just trying to make money off of it. No matter what it is, if it's instructional design,
Yeah.
we're dedicated to it. But yeah, because again, I haven't been a male ID, I haven't been an ID, really in for-profit world. So I'd be interested. I don't know how that
Yeah.
would pan out, but it definitely was a shift. You're right.
And I remember there was a shift too in the advisory committees. So you remember that we'd go up to Philadelphia and we'd have the advisory committee meetings. And these were mostly management folk that were there to lend their hand to, you know, essentially beg for things. But um, they wanted to do a lot of other things. And I can remember how hard I had to fight in the beginning. And I don't know if you were there at all those meetings. But there were many times that they took me on as if I didn't know what I was doing. And why do we want to have instructional designers? Why do we need that? I've got all these great instructors. They can put that together. And you go through all these philosophical discussions. And, they took some skin off my posterior in a couple of those meetings. I gave it back to them. And you probably know who I'm talking about in terms of the people that
Mm,
who we all became such fast friends that we laughed at it after that. But there is that moment when you have to have the credibility to move forward and have people just buy into you and trust you. And I don't think you could have ever gotten that if that would have been an outside consultancy running that part of that program. I think the whole thing was the authenticity of it, that the organization of transportation and you personally and I and others had said, we're going to make this work. And this is how we're going to make this work. And you need to trust us to make this work.
Hmm. I have one last question.
sure.
The Tom show. What do you do when you have a Tom in the room, and how do you stop that?
I
Ah!
do, and I do love him, and
Absolutely.
and I do respect him,
Right.
and
But like if there are other voices that need to be
right.
like
Oh, sorry, I
need
was
to be
just
elevated, what do you
he's
do in a
passed, so that's why I have like a little bit of a
yeah,
twinge here.
so
That was what I was
let's
hanging on
pretend that
to,
it's not
but
Tom. Let's pretend it's
right.
anybody.
So,
Like
but in general, I think, and this helps me like when I'm anxious about things like this or any sort of speaking thing, but
mhm.
realizing that it's not about you. It's about the process. It's about letting that flow through you and being an agent of what is to be developed. I wasn't butting heads with Tom, it wasn't the Julie Tom battle. It was
Yeah.
this is how we work,
Yeah.
and I'm facilitating that.
Yes.
And I guess there have been some instances where there have been other Toms, and I will say that
Yes, sir.
it
Have.
doesn't always work. It doesn't
Yeah.
always work,
No.
and sometimes that's just the nature of it. Um, some people just are not into cooperation and collaboration, and if they're not, you can't fit a circle in a square thing. I'm going back to my toddler now, right? Like you can't do it all the time. There's plenty of things within your control, but sometimes you just gotta see
Yeah.
it as it is and do what you can best you can around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think, Julie, think about that book. I know from personal experience how good you are at what you do. I know how busy you are with a young family and everything else that you're doing. So we appreciate your time that you've taken with this. I hope you will come back. I would like, in my mind of minds, to have a show where we have some of the SMEs join you and
Well,
we
that would be
talk.
phenomenal. I would love that. I think
So,
that'd be great.
where are you having most of your meetings now? They're probably out of town. I just saw there's one in New York that
We're
is going.
finally going to the West Coast this time. We're going to
Oh,
Yeah.
VTA. I mean, hopefully it's,
So you're doing
maybe
BART?
it's
You
not a
going out
public
that way?
announcement, but there we go.
So how many times was I promised we were going to work out in San
I know,
Francisco
and then the
BART?
pandemic and, everything, but
And I love San
so.
Francisco. I would live out there. So that broke my heart. But if we could get a group of SMEs and you together and we could find a way logistically to have everybody talk about that experience, I would love to do that.
Okay.
So,
I will
so
rattle that around in there. There's
yeah,
lots of great potential with that. And I want to thank you guys for having me here, but also just Chuck, especially going through kind of reflecting all these years, I wouldn't be where I am without you, and I don't think I've ever said it to you directly, but I think of you as a mentor also. I know Denise shared that with me, so I appreciate that. And, your authenticity made me realize if a guy like Chuck, and I mean this in a complimentary way, who is just real straightforward and like a human can do this is a space I could be in too.
well,
So
you made me proud. I'm going to tear up here. So we're going to say goodbye. I love you. And thanks for
I
being
know, I
here.
love you too.
Give a little one a hug for me.
I
So
will.
everybody, Instructional Design from the ground up. It's your YouTube channel. Join us, stay with us, subscribe if you feel like doing so, but always pay attention to what you're doing. Thank you so much.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys.